Peace Corps began its work in that region in 1990 as Peace Corps Czechoslovakia. From the beginning, Peace Corps entered Czechoslovakia with the understanding that its assistance would be limited, particularly for the critical period during that country's transition to democracy and the free market economy. It became Peace Corps Slovakia in 1993 with the independence of Slovakia, and then graduated in 2002 as a result of its incredible progress, growth, and development. At that time, Slovakia was independent and much transformed. It had free elections, a gradually improving economy, membership in the OECD, and then it later entered NATO and the EU, joined the EU. And it really is a testimony to the strength of the relationship between Peace Corps and Slovakia that 10 years later, even still, we're here together to celebrate Peace Corps and Slovakia and the magnificent relationship that the United States and the Republic of Slovakia have, partially because of Peace Corps. In Slovakia, Peace Corps had three sectors: teaching English as a foreign language, small business development, and environmental management. The focus of Peace Corps' program was on teaching and learning, skills exchange, materials development, organizational development, community outreach, networking, and communication. 345 Peace Corps volunteers served in Slovakia over 12 years. They worked in every region of the country. Volunteers served in over 200 schools, governments and non-governmental organizations, national parks, and landscape protected areas. So our second panel will feature 2 returned Peace Corps volunteers and 2 Slovak counterparts. They will discuss their cooperative work experiences supporting the development of civil society and getting out the vote. They will explore the meaning of their cooperation and collaboration and its lasting impact both within Slovakia and beyond its borders. So our first panel is Mike Hochleitner. Mr. Hochleitner joined Peace Corps in 1997 and was assigned to, I'm going to try to say this word right, Nadacia pri občiansku spoločnosť. Or Foundation for Civil Society.
Better than me the first time.
He served as a business consultant and helped the organization develop organizational and community development projects. 2 of his most important projects were the launch of NOS, we'll say it NOS, as an independent entity which is separate from its American parent organization, Foundation for Civil Society. He also brought Rock the Vote, Rok Voljeb, to Slovakia. Rok Voljeb, which is in Slovak, it's a wordplay meaning both rock the vote and year of the vote, was an essential element in encouraging young voters to turn out in large numbers the first time. Very, very exciting, and I can't wait to hear about this. After completing his Peace Corps service, Mr. Hochleitner went to graduate school at Stanford and is now the executive director of the Center for Leadership in Development and Research at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and he lives in Saratoga, California. So Mr. Hochleitner will talk to us about his relationship with his Slovakian counterparts, his experience with Rock the Vote, and how that has transpired into a bigger movement, even than limited to Slovakia and the United States.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and anybody feel free to call me Mike. It's a little easier. As I said earlier, different people in my family pronounce our last name differently, so sometimes I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So I thought just very briefly I could give a little bit of background, and I thought it would be helpful just to talk about why did I choose to go into the Peace Corps and why did I choose to go to the region of Central Eastern Europe. Talk a little bit about the challenges that I faced there, what happened when I was there, and then some of the lessons that I took away from that experience, which I think still serve me today, and I think have some relevance to how the Peace Corps thinks about engaging in other regions of the world. I graduated from college in 1993, and during college I studied economics and politics, and was very influenced by some of the big news stories at the time, which was really the fall of the Berlin Wall, what was happening in Eastern Europe, the uprising in China, the crackdown, and studying politics and economics. I was looking at these questions of free markets versus state-planned economies. I was looking at totalitarian systems or communist systems versus liberal democracies, and had a lot of debates. And then I traveled shortly after college, got the Eurail Pass, and traveled around Europe. Had a great time in France and Germany and some of Western Europe. And then I hit Central Europe and went to Prague and Budapest, Krakow, and then got out of some of the cities and went to some of the smaller towns in Poland and Hungary, and just had a completely eye-opening experience where all these things that I talked about in college and had opinions about were really playing out before my eyes in ways that had humongous impact on both the lives and the countries that I was visiting. And I could see simultaneously this sense of hope and the economies and sort of these countries opening up and becoming a lot more free. And I could see the benefits of that. And at the same time, I could see some of the downsides, some of the concerns, the fears, frankly, the terror. And I actually had a chance to visit. My wife was born in Moscow, and her grandmother was living in Ukraine. And so we visited her grandmother, who I think, seeing pictures of her back in the 50s when her and her husband were both decorated war heroes, essentially. She was a doctor. And just pictures of them, they were the image of optimism. They were going to conquer the world. And then to see her in a decrepit, crumbling apartment with essentially a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 of her kids and 4 grandkids. The only economic income she was receiving was pensions, which was clearly a pyramid scheme of some sort. It wasn't going to last forever because inflation was hitting them in a hard way. I could see both sides of this transition and the way that it was affecting people. And I thought, if I'm going to have any credibility talking about any of these issues or considering my opinion valid, I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time. And so when I had the chance to get assigned to Slovakia, I thought, that's fantastic. Of all the countries that made this transition, I was probably most inspired by the Velvet Revolution and what had happened primarily in Prague in 1989. It happened in Slovakia as well. But as I got to the region, I discovered that, there are some differences between the Czech Republic and Slovak Republic, and Slovakia was not in the same place. So when I showed up in 1997, it was amidst a lot of consternation and debate about the position of Slovakia, the direction of Slovakia, what was happening vis-a-vis the rest of the Visegrad countries in Central Europe, and the fact that Slovakia seemed to be, at least in the eyes of some, a black sheep of that part of Europe. And so I spent some time essentially working. I told Julius, who was my director of the small business program. I was in the small business program. So I really went over there thinking I would work with small business people and focus on really market engagement. So how do people develop business plans? How do they finance a company? How do they identify a market? And Julius informed us that, actually we'd be placed with nonprofit organizations, as we heard earlier, the NGOs. And so quickly I discovered that my focus was not going to be so much on market engagement and a little bit more on civic engagement. And so while I wasn't necessarily, I didn't feel that my background had any particular relevance to that, I was also interested in that area, and so kind of jumped into it. And very quickly I just had this experience as we were going through a strategic planning process, and Wendy Lures alluded to this earlier, that I was placed with a branch office of the Foundation for a Civil Society, known as Nadacja pre Občiansku Spoločnosť, or NOS, at the time.
Just like I
said. Still got it. No. And we started doing some strategic planning, thinking, okay, if this is going to be an independent organization, if it's not going to have the backing of an American financier or U.S. government financing, how is it going to justify itself in terms of programming? And during that time, I had just the experience of living in Bratislava and experiencing a summertime cafe scene. And even back in 1997, it was a very, very vibrant scene. You had these kind of cobblestone streets with the cafes spilling out in the streets, and young people, old people, just sort of a great mix. I mean, it felt like right out of, it could have been Paris, it could have been Italy somewhere, it could have been anywhere in Western Europe. And so reading the headlines of the paper, I just had this sense of kind of cognitive dissonance between what I was seeing in the streets and what I experienced as a very cosmopolitan, youth-oriented, Western-focused, positive culture socially didn't seem to match up with the politics that was unfolding in the country. And so as we were brainstorming about activities, I just had this notion that, if young people actually were voting in better numbers, maybe that would change the direction somewhat or have some influence on the government. And so, I threw out this idea of what about Rock the Vote? Has anybody heard of that? And to my surprise, nobody in the office, none of the Slovaks in the office had heard of it. It was sort of a new thing to them. And so, to be honest, I didn't even know that much about it. I just, I remembered it from watching MTV as a teenager, but I didn't really know the nuts and bolts of it. And so, as we started to discuss it, we learned that, there was interest amongst my counterparts in doing something to motivate young people to become more active, more involved. And B, within the donor community, there was certainly interest in that same thing, and also some interest in how we could import models from Western Europe or from the US that looked at these issues of how do you get young people more engaged. And so, had the luck of going out to LA and visiting with Rock the Vote's folks, and they allowed us to license essentially their materials or use their name. And to be quite honest, that probably got us a lot more momentum and credibility outside of Slovakia than it got us inside Slovakia, because within the donor community, I think Rock the Vote was known, but within Slovakia, no one really knew what this thing was. And so we really had to build internally, we had to build momentum, we had to build credibility. And so when I think about, I'll just sort of say it in terms of the lessons that I learned. One of the lessons that I learned was there was value to being American and just having exposure to American culture and ideas from America, and then stepping into a foreign culture, and there's some mixture. Inevitably, there's going to be some of those ideas that are ripe and that have some receptivity within this new environment. And so I was able to bring a few of those things. But the other side of that is that, if we really imported Rock the Vote, the idea of Rock the Vote as it's executed here in the US, I think it would have been an abject failure. I mean, who here thinks Rock the Vote has actually impacted voting in the US? I don't really think they've been all that successful. I think they've got a name for themselves. They've been on MTV. They have some brand recognition, but honestly, I don't know that they've had much of an impact. And yet I do think we had, and I say we in a very collective sense, had a very significant impact at that time in Slovakia, because I think the campaign was very different, and it was built into a movement. And what I learned from this experience was, coming back to the US, we think about voting as a very individualistic exercise, where you hear this notion of you vote because it matters, your voice matters. Well, I'm sorry, out of 300 people voting in the US, I don't really think my vote counts for all that much. And yet, I do associate myself with a number of different movements or different identities. And in that process, I essentially take on a social contract that as a member of a political party, or as a member of a labor union, or as a member of a youth group that says, here's some issues that are really important to us, and in order to have a voice, we have to show that collectively we have power, and we can move a block of voters. And so I think what we focused on in Slovakia, and were eventually able to help create the beginnings of, was an identity amongst young voters that collectively they had a voice and that they could have an impact. And that each of them, in some ways, had a bit of a social contract there, that as members of that group, they were going to vote because that was how they were going to become part of this group, and that was how that group was going to have an impact on the eventual result. And so it taught me quite a bit about civic engagement to actually go to Slovakia and spend this time and become part of this effort. And I say to anybody that I've worked with since, how fortunate I feel to have been at the right place at the right time, and to have had the chance to work with people, like Lenka, like Philip, like many others in Slovakia, who were, to me, sort of the founding fathers and founding mothers of the country in many respects. They put in place some of the systems that are today being recognized and are being exported as successes to other parts of the world where it's not democracy or rule of law is not as well established. One other thing that I brought, sort of a lesson that I took away, was just naivete is not always a bad thing. Going in there, not recognizing what we were up against and what some of the obstacles might be, I think was helpful to all of us in some respects, to go ahead and take something on that probably today, if you asked me, like, hey, would you sign up for this? I said, you're kidding? I've got a wife, I've got kids, I've got, bills and all that sort of stuff. So it's I think, having young people involved and having a little bit of naivete is actually great. And then finally, it's about the partnerships. And I just can't emphasize enough how little, I think I happen to be, as I said, at the right place at the right time. And, I've had a lot of people sort of say, hey, Mike, this was great. It was your idea. Well, you know what? If I wasn't there, the idea would have come about. It might have come about 3 weeks later or 3 months later. But, once we got underway, it was so clear that this was a scenario that was going to happen. It was going to develop. And certainly everybody within the NOS office played a vital role. I ended up working very closely with a counterpart, apart from Lenka, Mara Kapusta, who essentially became the coordinator of the campaign and put in 70, 80-hour weeks, as did many people. We worked with people in the media. We worked with another group that really, quite frankly, we spent most of the time feeling like we were competitors, a group called Hlava 98 that produced most of the spots that, frankly, put MTV and Rock the Vote to shame. Got, millions of dollars a time on TV Marquesa and various radio stations. And, so it turned into something much, much broader than what we were a part of. And honestly, most of the people working in the OK 98 campaign, which is a broader civic campaign, sort of where Rock Voljeb ended and where the OK 98 campaign began really blurred at any point during the months leading up to the election, to the point where you just had this very, very broad set of people raising awareness and creating, as Wendy alluded to earlier, that a year before the election, you just sort of go around, and when you start talking about the election, people's heads would be down, even though the polling suggested that there was no way Mechiar was going to win. He only had 26% of support or something like that, and yet everyone was sure that somehow it's just inevitable that there was no change possible. And as more and more people got involved and took a role, you just started to see this sense of optimism and self-reliance and sort of a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood amongst the people involved that was truly inspiring, and I think ultimately just created its own momentum to the point where now you could go out on the street and ask people, what do you think is going to happen? And you got a much, much different response, and people were pretty certain as the elections approached. And I just remember, my kind of most singular memory was the day after we had this final concert in Bratislava, and sort of a big turnout filled the square and the Old Town Square. And walking around the city the next day, you could get on any electrichka around Bratislava, and you'd see these stickers, Rock Voljeb stickers. And it's just at that point, and I started getting emails from my Peace Corps counterparts in Eastern Slovakia saying, hey, I walked into a bathroom the other day, and there was a sticker, above the toilet, or so, there was someone painted the image on sort of the side of the road in Banska Bystrica, and then I saw a picture of a 14 or 15-year-old kid who'd covered his skateboard in stickers of Rock Voljeb, and I just thought, okay, now it's a movement. Now it's got the momentum. And it's gone beyond us. It's not something that's being pushed out as a top-down effort. It's not a video campaign or a media campaign. This is actually, a movement of real people that are trying to signal a change. So,
fantastic. Thank you so much. Whoopsie. I think my papers are over here. Sorry. Maybe I'll just stay here. Yeah, Oprah style. I think I will. Oprah style. Sorry. Okay. Our next panelist is Lenka Sorochak. Ms. Sorochak is the director of the Pontus Foundation in Slovakia, which works to strengthen the capacity and organizational development of NGOs and conducts corporate social responsibility, philanthropy, public policy, and development education programs in Slovakia and abroad. She led the foundation during the institutional restructuring process while directing the foundation's programs and raising grant funds for foundation projects. Under her leadership, the Pontus Foundation established a business leaders forum in Slovakia to help integrate corporate social responsibility into core business structures. Ms. Surochak also directed programs to build institutional capacity of other organizations and promoted cross-sectoral cooperation with multilateral businesses, multinational businesses, and other donor governments. Since 2002, Ms. Surochak has been engaged in building Pontus's expertise through sharing its experience in societal transition, European Union integration, and public policy and social transition in the Western Balkan countries, Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova. Her primary focus has been value-oriented foreign policy of the EU and Slovakia. Prior to her work at the Pontus Foundation, Ms. Surochak worked for the Foundation for Civil Society in the U.S. and Slovakia. There's a theme here. She worked for the Slovak National Agency for Foreign Investment to help attract foreign investment into Slovakia, and as a reporter for Slovak television. She graduated with an MS in Management from the Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service at New York University. She also holds an MS in Journalism from Comenius University in Slovakia. And we are very excited to have you talk about your experience in working with Peace Corps and other partners, such as the Foundation for Civil Society, using the lessons learned from Slovakia and other places. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I feel like after Mike, it's very hard to follow on because Mike, sort of like Wendy, are like California, 360 sunny days a year, which is a little bit different, than it used to be in Slovakia, when we started our work. And also, I just completely forgot that Mike was hoping to be working for an SME, and now I feel like poor Mike, he was stuck with us.
No regrets.
Yeah, no regrets. But let me just put a number on what Mike has been describing on, and then I will try to move on with what we have done since that. Also because the room is full of friends who have helped us to build some of these programs. So I would like to give you the credit, many of you, for something which Mike called the naivete, but I consider it an incredible, eternal optimism, which essentially always allowed you to say yes to whatever crazy idea there was, and also never, and credit goes also to Roger and many donors, you never doubted that it can be done. And I think that's a great value which was given and empowered us a lot. But the number I promised is, when we were looking at the public opinion polls among the young voters, the first-time voters in the year 1994, we realized that only 26% of these first-time voters actually turn out and casted their vote. The result of the Rock the Vote, and as well as many other campaigns which were done under this umbrella Občanské oko, the Civic Eye 98, has brought over 80% participation of these first-time and second-time voters, which was the turning, the kind of a changing mass, which caused that we got this democratic government of Mikuláš Dzurinda in 1998. When I think of my work with Americans, and I kind of feel like sitting on this chair, I then have to, because Philip was sitting here before and talk about our transitional experience, I have this duty
Slavic chair
to continue. But let me tell you that you American people have been present in our lives also before 1989, and it was the commitment, and the helping hand, which was provided to the dissident movement in Slovakia. It was Wendy and Bill providing the free space of the United States, free democratic country, to the dissident community. And this has been something which has been on our minds when we joined the European Union in 2004, and when we were the full-fledged NATO member, and when we felt that it's our turn. It's our turn to show the solidarity with people of Belarus, show the solidarity with people of Cuba, and when we were asking our embassies to do the same, what you have been doing, and it hasn't been easy at the beginning. We have been all developing in our values, in our opinions, And this has been really also the reason why we have been working in Cuba very originally, why we started supporting the wives of political prisoners there, why we got the collection of funds from the Slovak individuals, which then people from Slovakia, but also people from Bulgaria, Romania, traveled with and handed money to the dissident ladies, as well as, we were trying to create the solidarity on the part of our politicians as well as the part of the politicians in Brussels to adopt the political prisoners and to keep showing that they actually still matter and that there is somebody who is caring about them and they are not forgotten. And we think that it's a small thing, but once when you get to Cuba and when you meet with these wives who aren't visited by foreigners and who have their little notepad somewhere deep in their kitchen table, and they have everything written just for you because they want to tell you, what all has happened, and they're just waiting for that kind of a visit. You understand that it really makes sense. And then when you tell them the name of the politician who is caring about the husband, they just carefully write it, and then again they put it down to the shelf as some sign of hope that they are not alone there on their island. This was the 1989 experience. Then, Slovakia was created in 1993. And these experiences, Wendy alluded, of creating the new country has actually turned out so beneficial for us when we started working with our friends from Iraq, because they were creating the new country. They have started looking for how to build their institutions, and this has been something where for the first time we have been working also with our government and making them realize what kind of progress actually even the government has made, and what we have learned when we placed the diplomats at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and at that time the director of the press department started explaining how they actually built the press office, and then he realized this is really something wonderful what we have done. And this is something what we can be sharing, and this is what is now the core of the governmental transfer of experience between the government, Slovak government, and the governments of Moldova and other places, the Western Balkans. The years of being able to regrant the USAID money through the first programs which were focusing on public policy in Slovakia have taught us, I would say, two important lessons. Like, one was the lesson that on what the public policy is and how people can take the power into their hands, but what it enabled us was to support the key people in Slovakia who have worked on the reforms during the time of Vladimir Mečer's government. Those were the people like Ivan Mikloš, with his economic policy, people like Viktor Nižňanský with his decentralization policy. And once these people came to the government, they actually had the bills ready. They actually knew what could be done and what should be done. This lesson we have been using in Belarus, where we created the Public Policy Fund and where we are supporting the young analytical community to figure out, what are the alternatives? What are the alternatives to the Lukashenko government? And just helping them to create the public discourse, helping them to also feed the political parties, to feed the NGOs, to talk among each other, because this is one of the lessons that we have learned, as Mike maybe a little bit alluded to that, we had competition, but later on we learned that probably the highest form of the competition is coalition and cooperation, and that we can reach more when we work together. So in Belarus, with the great help of National Endowment of Democracy, we were able to put together different think tank groups, which never talked to each other, and which everybody, each of them had their special mission, special ideas, special subject of studying, and they were willing to share the name Belarus Public Policy Institute. And this is now one of the very accredited organizations which has been also working with Office for Democratic Belarus. And this is something which we also help to create in Brussels, because we started as an EU member realizing the importance of democratic Belarus being actually heard also in on the Brussels level. I would say, and this is, I feel sort of my duty to say what has been going also on in Slovakia, because many of you have been part of it, and today's event is also about volunteerism and actually the celebration of volunteerism. It has been during the times when Mike was our Peace Corps volunteer, when we created the first volunteering event in Slovakia in a little town called Štitare, and when the first volunteers who were willing to work in the coalition with us were the Peace Corps, and also Nelson and people from the country, but also their counterparts. And this was the first event which have brought together around 150 volunteers to help renovate the house for abused women and their children. And since then, we have continued this work, and in June 17-18, we will be organizing the 5th year of so-called Our Town, which is an event celebrating the corporate volunteering, and we are expecting to have around 4,000 volunteers in about 6 cities of Slovakia. We are working with more than 60 corporations and their CEOs, which is also very important, and they will be assisting around 100 NGOs all across Slovakia. This is, I think, the great tribute to what has been done previously. And maybe just the last point is about the year 2010, when we started working also in Africa, and we started working in this true public-private partnership, where the Slovak government is helping us finance the project together with Microsoft Corporation, and it's a project helping the schools with technologies and IT learning. And we have the first results after the year and a half of using these technologies, where the students have been like 80% better on their grades and their achievements in the tests within the whole history of the schools, just because of this work of technologies and the learning through technologies. And it brought also a lot of encouragement to the parents' associations and to the whole community as such. So that's
Wonderful.
for now.
Thank you so much, Lenka. Our third panelist is Igor Naumovsky. Mr. Naumovsky was born in Macedonia and immigrated to the United States as a preteen. He joined Peace Corps Slovakia soon after graduating from university in 1999 as a volunteer in the environmental program. Because of his interest in linguistic capacities, Mr. Naumovsky was assigned to work with Roma communities in eastern Slovakia, both in a Roma settlement but also in an NGO in Kosice. Are you going to be running the marathon too?
No.
Where he promoted Roma journalism. He worked in community development at that time with that NGO. In addition, he supported the inauguration of the Roma Press Agency and promoted their local and international engagements. After returning home, Mr. Naumovsky went to graduate school to earn an MA in International Peace and Conflict Resolution. He later worked as a volunteer assessment and placement specialist here at Peace Corps, so he's coming home tonight. And he then worked on an Afghan project in IFES. Mr. Naumovsky now works as a program officer with AmeriCorps. So we're delighted to have you. We'd like to have you talk about your expertise in working with marginalized populations and how you help them find opportunities for positive engagement and community change.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you,
for that nice
Igor.
introduction. And thank you for the invitation for me to be back here at Peace Corps, which it's always good to be back at Peace Corps, and I certainly have a soft spot for this organization. I served in Slovakia from 2000 to 2002, and that was the last group of Peace Corps volunteers that was in the country. So we were the last graduating class. And I served as an NGO development volunteer, community service volunteer, sort of straddling that phase of working with different organizations at the local level. And so what I wanted to highlight here today for you was my interaction with organizations and working with organizations that work specifically with the Roma community, and how those organizations fit in within the civil society of that country, and some of the lessons that I learned throughout my experience in Peace Corps. I worked with 3 different organizations in Slovakia, and I can say that probably had 3 different experiences with those organizations that worked with Roma or helping Roma or assisting Roma or working with them in some capacity. But from all 3 organizations, I can probably take one. There's a common thread. There's a strand there that I can talk about, sort of what I learned throughout my experience. During our pre-service training in Slovakia, I remember talking to our program managers and talking about what sort of assignments that were available, what we wanted to do, and I remember expressing a desire to Peace Corps that I would like to work with the Roma community, and talking to especially Julius about this. I was born in Macedonia, so I grew up near the Roma community. I didn't know much about the Roma community, didn't interact with them very much, but I knew of them and of their place in society. But I didn't know much about them more than that. So when there was an opportunity for me to serve in the Peace Corps and to have an opportunity to work with the Roma community, I jumped at it. And so sure enough, Julius was able to find me a site. So what attracted me to working with this population in some ways, or my interest and desires, that looking at and living in Macedonia and growing up in Macedonia, this is a population that is very similar to the Roma population in Slovakia and maybe other places in Eastern Europe. High levels of unemployment, low levels of education, sort of living out there on the fringes a little bit of society. Integration is not there in a lot of ways. And a lot of Roma, not everyone, but a lot of Roma sort of led parallel lives to those of Slovaks and Macedonians and so forth. Those lives didn't intersect very much. And I always wondered why that would be. And not only that, but because they didn't intersect, there was not a lot of opportunity for collaboration and for cooperation on anything, pretty much. And so when I was placed in my community, the very first community that I worked in a little village called Rudniany in the eastern Slovakia. And this is probably one of the poorest villages out there in that part of the country, especially the Roma community is pretty hard hit, pretty economically depressed in that part of the community, in the state. The village used to be a mining village and it had its heyday in the 70s and 80s, but once that industry left with a changeover in government and a new system, there was a flight of people and there was just joblessness and just very difficult situation for the people that worked there, both Roma and non-Roma. And when I went to that village and started living in the village, what I found was a community that was very much segregated, sharply segregated amongst ethnic lines, and just very, very poor in a lot of ways. And what I found is that there's not a lot of organizations, there's not a lot of influence in that village from the outside. Other organizations working with the people in that community. So I think Mike talked about this in length as well, about the naivete that you have as a volunteer, and it served me greatly. Because I kept showing up, and they kept looking at me, and they kept thinking, who is this kid, first of all? And you're not even Slovak, you're American, for one. And secondly, how long you want to be here? And why? What is wrong with you in some ways? And so I saw some heads shaking and people moving away and thinking, okay, good luck. And so I kept going back, though, day after day. That was my assignment. That's what I know. That's what we do. So you kept going back, and after a while, you see people sort of get used to you, first of all, your presence, and second of all, they see that you're there really for the right reasons, and that you want to do something. And so when they saw me do projects, small projects, with the kids, or some sort of a dance class, or a cooking class, or whatever it may be, they sort of started seeing that, hey, maybe we want to be involved in this as well. So I would get people from the community, their fathers and mothers from the kids that I work with, and involve them to teach something or to help me out in something. And so you could see folks kind of being more warmed up to the idea of having someone there. And so I made it work a little bit on the fly, so to say, because the organization that I worked with was not a very well-established organization. So they had a very nebulous idea of what they wanted to do with the Roma. They just wanted to kind of help them, and that's it. And so there's not really there's no purpose, there's no intentionality in what they were doing. They're basically providing to them, not working with them. They're just providing them aid, providing them gifts in some ways, providing them assistance in some ways. And the Roma would take it, but then there was no back and forth. So that's what I experienced. And so that's why I think they saw with me and with Peace Corps and representing the Peace Corps there, something different that I hadn't seen before. And sort of a little bit of a life came in terms of, in that community center, in terms of working with the different people in the area. Now, unfortunately, the organization that I worked with, that was based in a neighboring town, after a while sort of imploded. There was really no base for me, no project for me to stay there in some ways. And so what I did is I did find another organization to work with in Košice, in eastern Slovakia, in the second largest city in Slovakia. And the organization actually was run by non-Roma, but they worked on Roma issues specifically. And they worked with Roma, and they were bringing them in into sort of as collaborators and to work together with them. So that was a market change for me, to go from a place where you're sort of put out there and you try to improvise in a lot of ways, to working with people that really had the passion, the drive to work with this community, and to really were being intentional, again, I'll use that word, in trying to affect some sort of change. And so what was great about them, they were very, very enthusiastic, passionate, and there are two projects that they did that I was involved in from the start. One of them was training young journalists, because the organization was run by journalists, training young Roma journalists, giving them that path to a professional field. And second of all, creating a press agency in Slovakia, first of its kind for Roma, so that the agency would provide an outlet out there to the wider media, to Slovaks and also non-Slovaks, to Roma as well, about stories and about life in the Roma community. And so that was very, very important for the people in those communities that I visited when they knew that that was happening, because it felt all of a sudden like there was a voice that was getting stronger and stronger for them, and a way for them to express how they lived and what they needed and how they can improve their lot, their situation. The organization that I worked with actually has done tremendously well since I was there. Just yesterday I went on their website just to see what's going on, just to see what they've done, and I was amazed. I mean, there's a section in English, there's a section in Slovak, there's a section in Romani language on the website. There's videos, there's stories, there's documentaries, there's all kinds of stuff that's happening, and I was simply amazed. I was amazed to learn that in 2010, I believe they won 2 awards at the Slovak National Journalism Competition for a documentary they did on a settlement in a Roma community. And so when I looked at the picture of the staff and I looked at the picture of the folks that work there, it's truly a collaborative effort of Roma and non-Roma. And that was really, really nice to see, because there's definitely a buy-in of the folks that are being interviewed, that are working in that organization and trying to make something positive happen for that community. So that was my second experience. And as a Peace Corps volunteer, as a lot of us do, you always have those secondary projects. You always do something else, when you're serving. And so I took over a project from another volunteer that left, that was a year ahead of me, in a small village near the Hungarian border, worked with a very, very small organization that was just starting out. And so I basically replaced her at the site and worked with them as much as I could. Now, I bring this organization out and telling you about it because it's very interesting and very different than the first two. It's a very small organization. You have about 10 people in the community, all Roma, that are very, very passionate about their community, improving their situation. They want to do something very badly, but they have no resources, they have no know-how, they have no collaborations, they have no way of contacting others, or there's no way of them sort of growing and maturing as an organization. So you're there and you realize the things that you take for granted are just not there. No one has worked with a budget before. No one has developed a proposal before. No one has done accounting before. There's so many holes there that the job is just too large. But you keep going back there, you keep going back there, you keep going back there, and when they see that, they start wanting to do well. They start wanting to sort of, grow and do other projects, and sort of, they have a sense of hope. There's something that we can do in the community. And so there are 3 different experiences that I had in Slovakia working with Roma organizations, or organizations that work with the Roma. But the thread there is that, when you look at Slovakia and you look at the Roma population even now, I haven't been there in a while, so I don't quite know what it's like now, but I don't imagine it has changed a lot. It's such a desperate situation for them in the country. And when you look at it and you think, my goodness, this is kind of hopeless and helpless in some ways. There's no way that a change can be affected here. You know, there just isn't. It's just too much. Things are too deep. Things are too intractable. There's no way. But I can tell you from personal experience working there is that there are people in those communities that really want to do well and to affect change in those communities. They're there. And so now I guess the issue is, the trick is for organizations in and out of Slovakia is, well, how do you identify those people? And how do you tap into their networks? And how do you nurture their relationships with them, not just for a week or two, but long term? And I think this is where the Peace Corps had a unique role. And Philip talked about this, walk in their shoes or walk the walk. You know, we're there day after day, day after day. You know, maybe with a little bit of naivete sometimes, but hey, that's fine. You were there, and you start living with them and working with them and seeing how they see things and starting to see things change slowly for their community. And so I think that's really the key is having something intentional where you devote the time and energy to work with this community and to identify the right people. They're there. They just have to be identified and worked with. I mean, again, I think for Peace Corps, one of the things that helped us as volunteers in that regard, not just being there day after day, but we had the inherent advantage from other organizations of having counterparts, having people that requested us, that requested our presence there. And these are the folks that really, truly are on the forefront. They do want to do things in their communities, whatever organization it may be in the civil society sector, Roma, non-Roma. And so I think working with those counterparts and you know, establishing those relationships long term is the key. And that's kind of my take on it.
Thank you so much, Igor. Wonderful. And then finally, our panelist, our last panelist is Filip Vagac, who you already met.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to introduce him anymore because he had many accomplishments and it was a long bio.
Thank you.
But he's going to just kind of tie things up and give us his perceptions of
listening
the
on
future.
for the second time, the person that was speaking already before Mike get to sleep. I hope it will not happen. You know, we are running out of time, and I was listening to the stories and was thinking like, because I had many stories from the Peace Corps volunteers, from the Baťa Junior Achievement, from Children of Slovakia. But what when I was listening to Mike, Lenka, and you, what kind of come up from all the stories, which I think is the kind of important message that Peace, and only Peace Corps can bring to the table, and is bringing to the countries where you go, is that, and this might sound kind of obvious to you, but it is not, and I want to stress that point. You know, the spirit of volunteerism, or that kind of coming to somebody and being with them and helping them for a year to some of the cultures or some of the, let's say, countries in transition, might seems to in the beginning like, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? Is it something what is special about it? Why you are doing it? And shifting, because I was part of a revolution, but now I would say I do not believe in revolutions, because that is not what is changing. I mean, some of the structures are changing, but the minds are the same. And it takes years, and it is a slow, step-by-step process. And volunteerism is something what is crucial, at least I feel it's crucial in that kind of a change. Right now, 20 years after the revolution, we are adopting a law about volunteerism in Slovakia. It's just now, debated in the NGO sector, and it's going through the government. It is coming to the table. It's coming to the place, and actually, it has really changed the society. How people were helping each other, but nobody was calling it volunteerism, and nobody kind of put it into the understanding what is important in the society. And I think that is something what is unique. And don't assume that in all other cultures that is something what is already there. I'm sure in Egypt they are helping each other, but volunteerism as such, as an idea, I don't think it is there. And that is something what is very kind of crucial. When I was reading the history of Peace Corps, when Humphrey kind of was helping Kennedy to get it through, I mean, it was not an easy path. When I was reading, they thought he is crazy. That is not. It will not work. It will be not helping. There were many obstacles in that road, and now we are 50 years afterwards, and look what we are speaking about. I mean, there were stories like this, and I think that is something what is really unique about Peace Corps, that what can be brought to the other cultures, countries,